There's a famous saying among investors that goes, watch what someone does with their money, not what they say. And I found some information out about two very large investors that you guys are going to want to know. We're going to talk about it in the show. One of them is Mark Cuban, one of the most legendary angel investors of all time. He in the past has talked very negatively about Bitcoin, but his holdings show differently. We're also going to look at Scott Minerd, who runs a $300 billion fund. That's about half the size of Bitcoin. And their move into Bitcoin, he was talking about it needed to crash back down to 20K. But I found something buried that probably explains why he's calling for that dip, and it's not because he really thinks price goes there. I think it's because he wants to buy. I'll explain exactly what I mean. And also, we're going to be looking at the most important chart for Bitcoin, and it's not the price chart. Look, I love seeing Bitcoin at 37, 38K. I'm looking at the Bitcoin price chart all the time for new trades and what the current trend is doing. But there's an even more important chart out there that I'm going to break down, and it shows the supply of Bitcoin that's leaving exchanges, hinting at what some of the largest holders think about this rally. That's all coming up on the Profit Maximalist Show. I'm going to give you guys a moment to hit like on the video right down below and subscribe if you've been liking these market updates. And I'll see you guys right after the intro.
One way out from here, and that's up.
We're going up!
It's $100 million. That's a lot of money.
We're going up!
Which makes it the holy grail of investment.
And let's just kick things off with the Bitcoin chart that you need to see. I think this is huge. It was published last week, but it's still relevant today. And it's because it looks at the macro cycles or longer term trend for Bitcoin. There's tons of ways you can try to come up with a top for Bitcoin. I think picking a top is a losing game. Statistically, you're going to be wrong most of the time, right? There's only one candle on the chart that's actually going to mark a top, but still you can get a sense for maybe when momentum is dying in a trend or when buyers are starting to get a little bit too excited and the move is too euphoric and Bitcoin needs to pull back. Those are the types of signs I like to look for. And you can use any number of technical analysis or those indicators, but the chart that we're going to look at today uses something called on-chain metrics, and it looks directly at the Bitcoin blockchain to understand what transactions are actually happening. Is money flowing into exchanges, meaning whales might be ready to sell, or is money actually being pulled out into cold storage? Because that would indicate people are still holding and not anticipating the sell-off, and if anything, preparing for a much bigger rally. Let's take a look at that chart right now. And this chart, which was published by Glassnode, they're an on-chain analytics firm. They're constantly looking at how many new wallets are coming out, what amount of wallets hold what amount of Bitcoin. They basically know everything that's happening on the Bitcoin blockchain. And one of their published charts last week was called the Bitcoin liquid supply chain. And this looks at how much Bitcoin is liquid on exchanges at any point in time, and then they also added the price to it. There's a lot going on here, and it's incredibly bullish in my opinion, so I'm gonna make it pretty easy for you guys to understand. Here's how it works. So on the y-axis, or on one side of the chart, we have the Bitcoin liquid supply chain, which is how much Bitcoin is being added or subtracted from the exchange. Basically, how much Bitcoin is being deposited or withdrawn. Keep in mind, these are pretty large numbers, and it's across all exchanges. So you get a real sense of how much Bitcoin is sitting on an exchange at any point in time. And if you go back to the 2017 price rally when we peaked, one thing you're going to notice about this chart is every single time in the past, remember, we've now been through a few cycles here for Bitcoin. We have the luxury of now having some history to kind of look back on and say, okay, what happens before the market tops out? What happens that leads to a Bitcoin price rise? And as we look back at the price peak, specifically the one in 2017, right? This is when Bitcoin's price was sitting right around 20K, or it touched that 20K end of 2017 going into 2018. One of the things you're going to notice is the Bitcoin liquid supply change goes massively positive. And that change actually happens before the price peak. So large holders, maybe OGs, maybe it's miners, the people that hold the most Bitcoin, probably some of the smartest investors in the world, were able to anticipate that things were getting a little bit too frothy, and just to prepare that we could be peaking, right, they started to deposit a ton of Bitcoin, meaning there was a huge positive liquid supply change of Bitcoin on exchanges. And that happened before the peak. That's really important to note out. I'm going to point that out with the yellow dot here. So that happens before the previous price peak back in 20K. You're also going to notice through that bear market in 2018, every single time we had a peak, there was one around 10K, there was one around 12K, even right before the drop when we eventually did move all the way down to 2 and 3K, right? All those times where the market basically topped out and then we had a downturn, the Bitcoin liquid supply change went very positive. Now, as we've moved on, we had obviously the market peak in 2019. As the market peaked, this was around 10 to 15K was the Bitcoin price. We were halfway through the year in 2019. And once again, the Bitcoin liquid supply change flipped positive before the price peak in June of 2019. So as Bitcoin hits 15K, the Bitcoin liquid supply chain is already getting positive, and right after, we started to have a sell-off, and that sell-off lasted all the way basically until March of 2020, right? We peaked at 15K, basically moved down until then. And so I think you guys are going to start to see this pattern pretty quick. Every single time that Bitcoin has had a macro top or a local high where price was not able to keep moving higher and we actually had to have a downtrend for 3 or 6 months, the Bitcoin liquid supply chain flips green, right? And then price declines. If you look at what's happened in 2020 and now as we move into 2021, yes, the Bitcoin price has gone from 3K all the way up to 37 or 40K. It's ridiculous. It's an exponential rise. We're going parabolic. It's exciting. I love it. So you have to start wondering, okay, could this be a local top? Or how would I know potentially that a macro top is coming? Because you want to prepare yourself before that 3 to 6 month downtrend happens. You're never going to time the exact top, but you can at least start to understand when are the largest investors getting a little bit worried. And as we look at the Bitcoin liquid supply chain, remember, it flipped green before all the previous tops. If we look at that liquid supply chain today, as we move into January and February of 2021, it has never been this negative before ever. Meaning, there is more Bitcoin being withdrawn and taken from exchanges as opposed to being deposited by those very large holders than ever before. And remember, this isn't a lagging indicator. So you might say, well, once price peaks, then the liquid supply chain is going to flip positive. That just isn't what's happened in the past. Before every single macro top or the end of a major trend for Bitcoin, it has flipped positive, and we have simply not seen that yet. And that's why I'm not exaggerating when I say this. I genuinely believe this is one of the most bullish charts for Bitcoin that I've seen, maybe ever, right? Not the price chart, not the volume numbers, not what Grayscale is doing, not what Michael Saylor is doing. This chart right here showing how much of the liquid supply chain is negative, is leaving exchanges, is incredibly, incredibly positive. Now, sure, it does not guarantee that we haven't topped yet, but I think you can make a very strong case that some of the largest holders in the world and all investors globally are withdrawing their Bitcoin from the exchanges, holding it, and probably preparing for a much bigger run. It's a different way to think about how long a price rally could last. Hope you guys enjoyed it. That is from Glassnode. The link is right down below if you want to check it out yourself. But now let's take a little step back from the charts and look at what two really important investors are doing. One of the names you probably know, that's Mark Cuban. The second name you might not know, and that's Scott Minerd. But he's the CIO over at Guggenheim. They manage $300 billion. That's half the size of Bitcoin. It's a massive fund. And whenever a giant fund like that is getting invested in Bitcoin and is talking about Bitcoin, you have to pay attention. Whether or not you think one or two investors are important, well, it does signal to the rest of the institutional crowd, to the rest of also retail and individual investors, how much faith big money has in Bitcoin. And Scott's been making rounds lately because he went on CNBC and called for a correction. The Bitcoin kind of had to crash almost 50% back down to 20K. Here's what Scott had to say. And keep in mind, the reason I'm playing this clip is because I'm going to show you after why he's probably saying that and why it's actually bullish for Bitcoin. Here's the clip on CNBC.
I mean, it's telling you that it's turning into a bit of a frenzy. You can see, a number of trading platforms are saying that they're going to start limiting orders to buy Bitcoin because they can't keep up with the retail demand. I mean, these are all signs of a frothy market, and markets like this are prone to harsh setbacks.
Now, this interview shocked some people because not too long ago, Scott was also calling for 400K in Bitcoin and said they saw tremendous upside. All of a sudden now he's calling for 20K and saying a sharp pullback needs to happen. So I want to dive a little bit deeper and understand why that might be happening, and you guys are going to find this really interesting. In order for seriously large investors to invest in Bitcoin, they generally have to file a form with the SEC. Now, Guggenheim submitted this way back in November, and that just got approved to start in February. So you can start to see why they wanted to build a narrative that, yes, Bitcoin can go up as they're applying to be able to invest in Bitcoin. That helps new investors invest in their fund. It starts to build a narrative that other investors should be looking at this. And now right before it comes out that Guggenheim, this massive fund, can buy Bitcoin, I think that might have at least played a role as to why he's saying a pullback is happening. So that's just one example of a large investor that might not be saying exactly what they're doing with their money. And as Bitcoin is going through this insane bull run, I think we're still right in the middle of it. The Bitcoin liquid supply chains, that chart I explained earlier, shows that we have not peaked out yet, at least if we use historical norms. Generally, we see a ton more Bitcoin flooding exchanges. That simply hasn't happened yet. So as we're in the middle of a bull run, we're going to see more large investors that like to go on CNBC and Bloomberg, whatever it might be. They're more incentivized to talk about price dipping and things crashing and things looking way too overheated and that we need a pullback. The reason they do that is because they would like to see that happen in the market. They need to get their buys in. They would obviously love to buy your Bitcoin at 20K. Large investors are in this for the long term. They're not in it for a 10 or 20% swing. I think that is playing a role. Who knows? I don't have any inside scoop on what Scott Minerd's thinking. I do think, though, that he has not changed his mind about being incredibly bullish on Bitcoin, having a target of 400 to 600K. I think we're going to see a lot more investors going on to CNBC and Bloomberg, giving bearish forecasts, hopefully so they can get their long-term allocations. Now let's also take a look at what another famous investor said. This one's Mark Cuban. I imagine most of you watching or listening to this know who Mark is, one of the most legendary angel investors of all time. And Mark in the past has been a Bitcoin skeptic. I'm going to play you guys a clip where he says he would rather own bananas than Bitcoin. And then I'm also going to show you that he might have changed his tune and he actually is holding some Bitcoin. The funny part about all this, he hasn't made that too public yet, and I think it's because he wants to buy a lot more. Here's the clip of what Mark used to think about Bitcoin.
Here's the thing about crypto, particularly Bitcoin. Bitcoin is worth what somebody will pay for it. Did you ever see someone who collected baseball cards and they were really proud of their baseball cards because they kept on saying they were going to go up in price? Comic books, same thing, even artwork. There's no real intrinsic value. You can't eat a baseball card or shouldn't eat a baseball card. Your artwork might look good on the wall, but not much you can do with it. Bitcoin, there's even less you can do with it. At least I can look at my baseball card and go, ooh, that's my favorite player. That's Roberto Clemente. I can look at artwork and go, wow. I'd rather have bananas. I can eat bananas. Crypto, not so much. Look, I can make a great argument for blockchain. There's a lot of applications and they'll be used, but you don't need public Bitcoin, BTC. You can create blockchain on your own without using all the available cryptocurrencies.
Now, as you hear that clip, you might say, okay, whatever. It's one investor. Who cares what he thinks about Bitcoin? There's always going to be skeptics. I agree with you. But you have to consider that Mark is someone that a million, maybe tens of millions of people look up to in the investing world. And they say, look, he's been brilliant in other asset classes. He's been brilliant and very successful in investing. If he doesn't see value in Bitcoin, maybe there's nothing there. This is just another case of an investor saying something very differently from what they're doing. In a recent Twitter AMA, Mark Cuban did disclose that he does indeed own some Bitcoin, he owns some ETH, and he actually owns some DeFi coins as well. And that's why I think it's so important to watch what these investors are doing with their money. You have to pay attention. I'm always going to cover it on this show versus what they're saying. Talking about crypto crashing or saying Bitcoin has no value. It's funny that both of these investors are probably trying to acquire as much Bitcoin as they can, withdraw it to cold storage, just like the rest of the globe is, and that is incredibly bullish for this Bitcoin trend. And that's all I have for you guys in the Profit Maximalist show today. Remember, I try to cover the key trends, themes, and trades every single day happening right here on this channel. So hit the subscribe button right down below and smash the like button if you want me to do more episodes like this, looking at what some of the sharpest investors are doing with their Bitcoin, maybe even have an episode specifically covering on-chain analytics. I think it's a really interesting topic. Hit the like button. I want to gauge some interest. And also, if you guys listen on iTunes and Spotify, I hope you're enjoying these audio market updates. You can always catch the episodes right there on the go. Keep up with the crypto market. That's all I have for you guys today. If you are trading this madness, go check out Bybit. They sponsor these videos. It's the best place to trade your Bitcoin. And you can also get a $500 deposit bonus when you sign up. Not a lot of exchanges offer that, so check it out. It's in my link right down there in the description. That's all I got, guys. Let's enjoy this Bitcoin bull trend. I'll have another market update coming out for you guys tomorrow. Also have some crazy interviews lined up with traders that I respect. We're talking about trading bots. We're talking options opportunities. We're looking at one trader who turned 5 Bitcoin into 50 last year. It's going to be a lot of good content coming your way. Hope you guys enjoy it, and I'll see you on the next video.